Assalamu alaikum, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming this evening to our talk entitled, I'm not sure if Friday the 13th is actually part of the title, I think it's just unlucky enough, maybe not. So the City Circle like to do things that are always topical, so obviously given the date, I think there was probably a shortage of speakers to talk about Muslim sort of serial killers and people wearing hockey masks, so they decided to opt for what is tomorrow, which is Valentine's Day. But I think the title works quite well. Friday the 13th, Unlucky in Love. I'll leave you to think about how close that is on various levels. We're pleased to have three speakers today who I think will actually approach the topic from three different angles. The City Circle does obviously have a variety of topics that it looks at. And some of them, arguably, you could say are slightly more, I suppose, serious, slightly more disturbing. And I think on the surface, I think one could make a mistake in thinking that this is probably one of the more light-hearted topics that we look at. But actually, if you think about it, I think that actually this is quite an important topic if you look at our community, and obviously from our understanding of what is the cornerstone of essentially the human experience on this earth, which is family, which stems from marriage. It's actually something that's very, I think, current and very much, I guess, relevant to all of us, maybe more so than actually some of the other topics that we have. Three of the speakers we have will hopefully approach from three different angles. The first will be Dr. Fauzia Ahmed, who's an academic and a sociologist, whose research has focused really on a range of areas of the experience of British Muslim women, whether it's in education, employment, or social welfare. In particular, at the moment, she's doing a study on British Muslims and their experiences, both the difficulties in getting married and staying married, and inshallah she's going to touch upon that. She's currently based at the Department of Political Sciences at University College London, and is an honorary research fellow at the Centre for the Study of Ethnicity and Citizenship at Bristol University. Followed by that will be Rooful, who will bring some of his practical experience. Rooful trained as a chartered accountant, but now has moved into certainly more creative elements, everything from sort of photography to branding. But his main area of experience, which we'll be focusing on today, is through a networking organisation called the Emerald Network, which certainly I think many of you would have heard of, which has been running for 10 years, or over 10 years I believe, and certainly has had a range of events, which I think his focus will be very much on sort of, I guess, the social interactive aspect that exists. And then finally, inshallah, we'll have Shaykh Shahnawaz Haque, who will talk about, I think, from his experiences. His background is that after working in the city briefly, he then retrained as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and his focus very much, he has a practice and focuses very much on working with his clients from both, I guess, bringing an Islamic perspective as well as his sort of more technical training into dealing with issues. Obviously some of which are, counselling couples and dealing with that aspect. So he'll hopefully bring some of that into the discussion as well. Each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes, inshallah, and then there'll be an opportunity for question and answers after that. So it's probably easier if we just let it flow through and then keep your questions towards the end, inshallah. So without further ado, inshallah, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Fauzia.
Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. It's lovely to see you all and some familiar faces as well as new. I was asked to come today to talk about the issue, given that I spoke last year on Valentine's Day, and it's clearly been it's a significant issue. Lots of people are very interested in it. I've spoken at other events where there've been a lot of people who just want to know about the issue around marriage, and I think lots of people gain some sense of solidarity in the fact that they are not alone and that it's a multiple experienced problem, whether you're male or female. So I was kind of wondering about what to say about the situation given a year on. What has changed since I was here Valentine's Day last year? I have to say, not that much, other than the number of people who started calling me auntie at marital events has increased dramatically. So that is one of the depressing features of the research that I do. The other fact is that very little has kind of changed. In fact, I think that there are more problems for various reasons. I think the situation is becoming compounded in various ways, and I hope to sort of try and not repeat what I said last year, or repeat what I said Rooful organised an Emerald event, I think in November, try and build on some of that. So I'll do a quick little recap on some of the issues that, as a researcher, I kind of face. So I'll try and whiz through some of these. So before that, there was this little story that I came across in, the Daily Mail, which is a really good source for sensationalism and lots of kind of really interesting stuff about Muslims and marriage. And our friend Mizan Raja, who runs Muslim marriage events, seems to feature quite prominently in that paper as well. But this was something, I think it kind of exemplifies some of what I will say, and you might realise afterwards why I kind of stuck this up, apart from just wanting to get a cheap laugh. Saudi husband tells his bride he wants a divorce during their wedding after seeing her face for the first time when the photographer asked him to pose for pictures. So basically, he hadn't seen her before the marriage, and then when the nikah was completed and she lifted her veil for the photographs, he recoiled in disgust and said, "You are not the girl I imagined, I am sorry, but I divorce you." And he divorced her there and then. Apparently she was so grotesque he couldn't envisage living a life with her. So it sort of comes off the back of another story that the Daily Mail featured, where a Saudi man divorces his wife after she didn't reply to his WhatsApp messages. So he spent a day sending her text messages or WhatsApp messages, and she wasn't replying, so he got very annoyed and he decided to divorce her on that basis. And the only reason she gave for not replying was that she was watching her favourite soap opera at the time, and she was watching reruns or something like that. But it just highlights some of the superficiality that technology has allowed us to sort of take over in our lives. So the key question that everyone is asking is, why, despite increasing choice, are British Muslims finding it so difficult to meet suitable British-born matrimonial partners? It's, I think, an unanswerable question. I don't have the answers, but I can certainly point to some things that I see happening. So, as I've mentioned in other talks, and I'll mention it just again for the sake of context, in terms of social change, we've seen a change in discourse from young Muslims from the earlier talk of arranged marriages, which our parents used to talk to us about, to that of what's known as an Islamic or a halal relationship. What does that mean? It sort of has interesting connotations for different people in terms of the way they conduct their relationships. Some people have talked about it in terms of looking for the third way, or meeting someone in the middle meaning between Western and between Islamic conceptualizations of what someone should be. And people talk about love within the parameters of a halal relationship and feel that that's totally compatible with an Islamic identity. So I had someone say, "I want fun and I want romance," and I'll get back to that quote in a little moment. So the impact of social change, well, as you know, we've seen the commercialisation of marriage. There's a vast increase in the number of matrimonial websites and events. This has increased exponentially over the past 10 years, 10, 15 years or so. But what does this increased choice mean? And I've found that this increased choice leads to more confusion, and it leads to an inability to decide. It leads to superficiality in terms of marital choices, and it's leading to what everyone seems to be talking about, this checklist mentality. And one of the features of this sort of change in attitude has been increased professionalisation with higher education and more professionalised jobs. Increased professionalisation has led to an increased sense of individualisation. And so one of the features of that has been the rise in internet dating amongst Muslims. Again, I mentioned the higher numbers of Muslim matrimonial websites. And the use of marriage apps, which again have been introduced for various matrimonial events. Again, Muslim marriage events have introduced them, and I know other people have also taken that on board. So in some ways, the marriage app, the use of the app, the mobile app, may be exemplifying the problem. And I've sort of put a question there, swiping your way to marriage. What it's tended to do is, in some ways, it's opened up a Pandora's box, and it's encouraged this sort of checklist mentality, which is quite limiting for various reasons. So there are some parallels in terms of the sort of sociological literature with what we're seeing amongst British Muslims, and I think across diaspora Muslims in the West, with some sociologists, Ulrich Beck and Elizabeth Beck-Gersheim's notion of individualization, which is them talking about Western relationships and how changes in personal relationships, family life and social structures are becoming far more individually focused instead of couple focused, instead of thinking about selves as a we, and in terms of a couple, people are becoming more individual in terms of their relationships and what they're expecting from their partners. Amongst Muslims, we know that we're seeing an increase amongst degree-educated Muslim women in their late 20s, 30s and 40s in terms of marrying ages becoming increased and in some cases not happening at all. So there's a quote I got here, the negative is when a girl is educated and she continues further education, she gets older, and the older she is, and it's in our community, the more older you get, the more negatives there are. They'll say, oh, she's still not married yet. And this happens, I get this sort of comment quite a lot. So some of the issues that I think are worth having a look at is how segregation from early ages at Muslim events impacts on male-female relationships and interactions. There's a great deal of naivety around relationships. There's too much emphasis on the need to get married, i.e. completing half the deen and or on romance rather than the realities of sustaining and working at a relationship. This is one of the things that we see time and time again when people come to marriage events. They have really high expectations and they're quite unrealistic as well at times in terms of what they're expecting and what they assume a relationship is about. And people are sort of forgetting that relationships are hard work. It's not all lovey-dovey, it's not all romance. It's just hard, sustained work, and it's not also about instant love and instant attraction, which seems to be one of the issues that come up again and again. So some more issues. There is, because of this sort of, because we've not been sort of socialised into speaking to the opposite sex as Muslims, there's a lack of confidence in speaking to members of the opposite sex, especially for marriage purposes. And that as Muslims, we're not geared to thinking about premarital romantic relationships. One of the bugbears I've had with academic research on Muslims and marriage, especially Muslim women and arranged marriages, especially research from the 90s and 80s and 70s, is that a lot of it would focus on teenagers, and my criticism of it was that teenagers have hormones going all over the place. They don't really understand what relationships are about, and yet you have these academics coming and asking them about their arranged marriages when they're 14, 15, 16. And as girls, they're not allowed to talk about boyfriends. It's a forbidden word, so they talk about arranged marriages, but the reality has been that lots of women from those cohorts would go on to higher education and find that the expectation of marriage never materialised for various reasons. And I've said things about that in the past. So as Muslims, we're not kind of geared to thinking about premarital romantic relationships or feeling comfortable about talking about these issues openly. And I think perhaps I might be wrong about this, but I think that there's also a sense of Bollywood or Hollywood subliminal influences influencing the way we conceptualize relationships. So we have these romanticized, unrealistic ideas and ideals about what a relationship means and how one goes about conducting oneself in a relationship. There are other issues that have come up in interviews where women in particular have talked about the term players. I wonder how many amongst the women know about players or understand what I mean about players. Just a show of hands, yeah, there's a couple, okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but from the perspectives of women who've spoken to me, they're talking about men who have large, and men, you will know who you are, that is. Men with large numbers of female friends. Some people have called them seat fillers, with a history of girlfriends, Muslim and non-Muslim, and this becomes a real problem. They also get labelled as commitment phobes, and they're commitment phobes amongst women as well, but it's a particular problem amongst men, especially when they think they've got a large kind of group in which they can choose and pick and choose, or not choose from that group at all, but it sort of in some ways acts to massage an ego to have a large number of female friends that one can phone up at any point in time, and sort of maintain this platonic relationship without them acknowledging that where men might sort of think this is completely platonic and not have any sort of emotional attachment towards a woman in that regard, I think women conceptualise those relationships very differently, and lots of women will assume that if a guy is a friend with her for a long period of time and he calls her up regularly, that there's something in it and it's going to lead to something, and then there's a lot of heartbreak when it doesn't. And I think that's something that we need to sort of acknowledge in terms of a failing in the way that we are thinking about relationships. And so, again, something for us to think about. So some of these consequences, and I've mentioned some already, unrealistic expectations amongst men and women. The issue of being shy is quite a natural issue if you're Muslim and you're talking about marriage and relationships. So lots of people come to events and lots of people approach the internet or their parents, and they're very shy about the whole process, which is understandable. But I've spoken to some lovely, lovely young men who are very shy, and they feel that that's kind of worked against them. They see that being shy is seen as a negative, and it's seen as a sign of weakness or a lack of social skills. So I'll say something a little bit about that in a moment again, but another consequence of some of the issues that I've been raising is this issue around looking for perfection and failing to acknowledge that all people have flaws. So there are some people sometimes who look for unrealistic degrees of compatibility. There was a little survey that I was involved with, a very short, unscientific sort of survey where a small number of people responded about what they were looking for in terms of matrimonial partners. Degrees of compatibility was a question that was asked, and this was just survey-based. The majority of people were expecting at least 70% in terms of a degree of compatibility with their life partner, future life partner. Now, I'm not sure that that's an entirely realistic expectation, given that everyone comes from so many different backgrounds, but it's a little bit worrying when people do sort of have such high expectations and they expect so many things to be common before they even think about taking things further. There's also another aspect which we, again, don't really talk about, but it's the inability to be able to cope with rejection or a failed relationship. So, again, the scenario is someone meets somebody either online or at an event, they meet for a few times, emotions might get involved or not, but when one person decides it's not suitable for them and they don't want to go any further, the other person is left devastated. And again, because we've not been inculcated into a culture of having relationships from an early stage, to have rejections is really very difficult to deal with. It's very difficult to know who to talk to about it, because there's an issue around personal integrity and shame, but it's also very difficult to sort of deal with because it feels like it's all-encompassing. That devastation is something that someone feels they're never going to get over, and they don't know how they're going to sort of move on or meet anybody else because they thought that person was absolutely right for them, etc., etc. So we have a real issue around how we deal with rejection on a personal and a psychological level, and I'm sure Shahnawaz can say more about that. The other consequence, of course, is that both Muslim men and women are turning to non-Muslims for marriage. And last year at City Circle, there was an interesting talk and a documentary, or clip of a documentary about women who turn to non-Muslim men for marriage. And again, it's an issue for a separate issue in itself, because I think it's very it's a very big issue. But there might be things that we can sort of both learn as men and women from the way that our non-Muslim friends conceptualize and handle relationships, and the way that they think about each other. Okay, I'm running out of time. So some common comments that I've heard, which again, they're just really short comments, but I think these probably have some significance or some sort of sense of familiarity to most people. So a lot of people who are quite shy will say to me, I want to be discovered. And again, it's this issue of if it's meant to happen, it will happen. It's not taking responsibility for your marriage or for the lack of marriage. It's sort of assuming that God will provide you with a partner and that you don't have to do anything. If you just sit there and you sit tight, it will happen eventually. And I think it's probably not really going to happen in that way anymore. Another thing that women often say is the guy should make the first move. They're paid to come to an event and then they just sit there and they will not ask for help if they want to talk to somebody. And again, I say to women, look, you paid your money, you should try and get your money's worth if you come to an event. You paid, £30 or so, or whatever, however more. If you're interested in someone, talk to them. Look at the Prophet's wife. Take the example of the Prophet's wife, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She didn't kind of back away when she saw a man that she wanted. She went and asked for his, proposal. She was 15 years older. Why is it that modern women who are educated, who are accomplished in their professional fields, just fall to pieces when it comes to a marriage event? Come on, sisters, kind of be a little bit more proactive in this. Another comment I hear time and time again, there was no click. Again, I'll say something about the click as we go, as I'm trying to whiz through my slides. But the issue of click or clicking is quite a significant one, and I think it holds people back. And then I want fun and I want romance, is what I've said before. So some reasons for excuses and dismissing potential partners: ethnicity, and again this doesn't seem to apply to white Western converts. You know, we have an issue around cultural baggage here. It's a kind of throwback to a colonial mentality where everyone wants someone who's white, thinking that for some reason someone who's white has no cultural baggage. They do, they have their own cultural baggage, they have their own issues, but it's quite it's quite depressing when I go to lots of the events that are geared towards reverts or converts. There might be one or two people who are converts. They're not always white. If they are not white, nobody's interested in them. If they're sort of either Indian, from a Hindu background or Sikh background, or they're African American, no one wants to talk to them. If they happen to be white European, there's a whole, you know, everyone goes crazy. It's like bees to honey, and it says something quite revealing about us as a community. The age aspect is very significant, especially amongst men. There are a number of men, again, you know who you are, who will not look at a woman past 30, even if they're 34. If she's 31 and she has all the sort of right conditions, she's 31, they will not look at a woman past 30. I spoke to a guy at an event who was very popular. He was 34 and he didn't want to look at a woman past 30, and I said to him, why? And he said, well, the women who are past 30, all they're thinking about when they get married is they want to have children straight away, and I don't want to have children straight away, I want to be able to enjoy my life a little bit. And I said, well, that's not entirely the case. A lot of women, by the time they reach 30, they want to also be able to enjoy a marital relationship without having to worry about children straight away, because they've got to that point finally, and they think this is their chance to be able to relax a bit, to travel a little bit with a partner, enjoy the benefits of having a partner in their life. And he said, well, if they don't want to get married, then their parents will be pressuring them. And he said, I've spoken to 400 women and it's the same all the time. And I think, well, therein lies the problem. You've spoken to 400 women and you still can't find a wife. So appearance, again, we all know appearance seems to matter. And, you know, it becomes quite superficial. I've had both men and women dismiss, I've seen them dismiss partners or potential partners because they wear glasses, or because, I mentioned this last year, because the guy is bald, or losing hair. I've had women say, well, you know, he has to have a certain degree of baldness. If he's completely bald, that's not good. If he's starting to recede, that's okay, I can handle it. But what they're really looking at, what they're worried about, is the wedding photo. And that's the key thing. And they're not actually thinking about the fact that this might be a really lovely guy. And the fact that lots of, you know, again, I said this last year, I'll say it again, it's a cheap laugh. Baldies can be hotties. And, you know, this just doesn't seem to kind of get through to lots of women. But the appearance issue is an issue among men as well, who seem to want someone who has everything. They want someone who has supermodel looks, who is accomplished as an academic, who has a professional job, but one that isn't going to threaten their own position, who's going to sort of mix in with their in-laws, etc. Sect is a very significant issue, religious sect. Genetic issues, impairments. Again, people who might have slight problems in their family or issues in their family, it seems to be a big problem. No one wants to kind of get involved, especially if someone has taken the trouble to be upfront about these issues. And I will kind of finish in a moment. But again, someone who's had a hearing aid, for instance, that seems to hold people back. And again, I wonder why. You know, it's not any indication of the personality of the person or the type of family that they might come from. So there's an issue around status, this sort of ideal types, even when looking at divorced and widowed events, and I had something to say on that. The issue of lack of instant click or attraction, and then attitude, someone better around the corner. And again, this is leading to this issue around individualization and superficiality. So this checklist mentality is working against both men and women. It's restricting potential matches based on superficial criteria. There's a fear of rejection that all of this is creating. It's led a lot of people that I know to hide behind online services to avoid face-to-face events or meetings and to avoid disappointment. No one wants to be the wallflower in the room when no one is asked to meet them or talk to them. And it's led to a development of unhealthy attachments to people online through phone or text without meeting. So again, what happens when people meet online or through other sorts of non-visual means is that they form these emotional attachments. They start talking online, they start texting, speaking on the phone, feelings start to develop, and again, that's really unhealthy. When people meet, when eventually they do meet, it ends up becoming a huge disappointment, and this issue in the cycle of rejection starts again and again. So this issue with checklist mentality, there's an acknowledgement of it amongst lots of people, and they know that we shouldn't be having this checklist mentality, but the other attitude is, others can compromise, but I won't. So it's everyone else's problem, but I'm going to stay with my checklist mentality because I'm important. And there's this over-emphasis placed on the first appearance at a meeting. It's possibly a throwback to the Asian style of marriage, where introductions were based and decisions to see another family again were based on the first meeting. And there's this notion that I call the ideal types, which is very different to the sociological definition of ideal types, but is where people sort of set up in their checklist mentality a number of criteria that they think is going to, and compromises that they make, but even those compromises are set within this ideal type image that they have. So, for instance, a guy I spoke to who's divorced with a kid, so I'm willing to consider another woman who's divorced with a child, but as long as the other husband, the other partner isn't on the scene, as long as the child is a certain age and can, and won't remember their original parent, as long as this, that and the other. So they kind of introduce a whole different set of sub-criteria in order to sort of back up something that they're kind of not willing to compromise on. So this is kind of a very individualised response. It's not considering people as a whole. It's not considering the fact that everybody has baggage. And again, if we look at Western relationships, where people fall in love, when people decide to marry, they decide to marry the person. They don't worry about, or they are prepared to take on board the fact that the person has children maybe from a previous relationship and that the other partner might be involved. They make allowances for that. And so we need to, again, think about where we are in this and how we need to respond. So this issue of giving someone a chance tends to often amount, if someone does give someone a chance, it tends to often amount to speaking to someone on a face-to-face meeting just on one occasion. And there's something to be said for the slow burner. The slow burner is the person who takes a little while for you to get to know. What often happens is that people coming to matrimonial events are not giving the other person a chance. They're not really getting to know them. They think they're giving them a chance by agreeing to meet someone who might not meet up to 70% of their criteria. But what they're doing is they're already set in their mind that I'm not going to be interested in meeting this person again, and then they cut that off there and then. But most relationships, we think about our friends, we think about relationships that amongst people we know who are married, develop over time, and we forget to kind of include that factor in our searching. So, just concluding with a quote from someone, where she says, I think if you do meet somebody and you fall in love, whatever, I don't think there is any problem, because I think when you are in love, it's based on good friendship from the beginning anyway. So I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Okay, so can everyone hear me okay? Okay, well my name is Rooful, the founder of Emerald Network. Now for those who've been to an Emerald event, quick show of hands, are there anybody in the room who's been to an Emerald event? Yeah, quite a few of you. So hopefully however long you've gone or have been compared to me from the outset, the last 10 years has been an interesting eye-opener. And the eye-opener is fantastic to see that in terms of Fauzia's findings, incredible parallels to what we've witnessed on the Emerald social scene. Now, in terms of, I would say, using it as a means of finding someone, i.e. social events as a forum, it only complements what's already out there. And for some reason, it's a case of not really complements, it's probably like a last resort, because it literally tried absolutely everything. So, for example, I remember Channel 4 once did a research, they were doing a dispatches program about the Muslims on the social scene, as in looking. They said, what are the routes? And I go, well, not in any particular order. There would be, obviously, family for those who are connected, finding someone at university, left university, didn't work out. How about the world of work? Oh, not many Muslims at work. Never mind. What about your friend circle? Getting a bit tenuous now, can't find anybody in the friend circle. Then you resort to potentially online marriage events, as far as you mentioned, old school matchmakers in the community, Auntie G's basically. Then you have, the mosques are, shall we say, active and they run a service. So you can see, we're kind of like thinking there's about 8 different kind of routes, but there's also social events. So for them, they've tried those, the resorting to social events, or it's just a complement in terms of what's out there. But people, it all comes with intention. I would say, one observation, it's all about the heart at the end of the day. If you come to a social event with 100% focus, that's it, I'm going to treat it as a marriage event, most people get disappointed. I will be honest actually. So if the heart is slightly impure in terms of intention, you're on a tunnel vision, mission, not going to speak to anyone other than the potential husband or wife, those people do fail with a little f, unfortunately. For example, charity events, that's one of the social events out there. Unfortunately, these are real life stories without naming names, basically. We had somebody back in the days, I think it was a Kashmir earthquake appeal. I'm not sure, we raised over £10,000, what have you. Everyone was at round of applause. The waiters of a restaurant, they gave their wages for the day, so it's quite emotional. Everyone's feeling quite emotional. And this sister comes up to me, oh, it's an amazing event. I thought, oh, thank you very much. Goes, great ratio of men to women. And I was thinking, oh God, totally missed the point, in terms of the fundraiser. So you can see some people going with a mission. Then there's other people we find, unfortunately, they'll come late and leave early, and all they really came for, quickly have the meal, eyeballs, who needs CCTV? They are the best of eyes. They can literally scan the room and say if there's anyone there. And because there's no one for them, they're the first to leave, which is a shame. They didn't really interact socially to get the best. So I would say those who get the best out of it is work on the heart in terms of the intention. Because ultimately it's a bit of a maze out there in terms of where do I look, how do I look, and what the obstacles. I would say if you look at a maze, deep down, let's be honest actually, the best way to navigate through the maze is almost like top down. Look at the big picture. Look at the roots and social circles and social events, what's out there. Then you'll know which way do I get in onto the sea, which way do I get out on the other side of the husband or wife. You can see the bigger picture when you do step back. Because when you're on ground level, you might say, you're going to struggle to navigate. For example, if someone's only interested in doctors because they're a doctor, they'll only go to doctors' events. Before they know they navigate, dead end, there are no more doctors' events until next year, the annual something event. So you can see it doesn't help. Then they'll be only interested in profession specific. Imagine, I'm only a lawyer, only interested in marrying a lawyer. Go to lawyers' events. Again, not many of those, and then dead end. Look at the big picture and see what other avenues there are, and I think that's when some people do succeed, because they'll think other avenues like volunteering for projects. These are still classed as social events as such, but at least you've got a chance to meet more people. Traditionally, if you think, life could be easy if it was just a simple, almost like a tube map. We start at home, then we grow up and go to school, then potentially straight to work, or if not go to university. Everything seems to be okay, and geographically, how great would it be if someone was on your doorstep? But that's not reality, as we know. However, we've seen on the social scene, some people still think that is a version of reality. They'll only look at their zone, only people from northwest London, or strictly nobody south of the river. All those kind of mindsets, and definitely not more than that because they speak funny. So it's a case of they don't help themselves, I'll be really honest actually. So my suggestion, and from seeing people on the social scene, is look outside your zone, literally outside your comfort zone in terms of geographical. Wonderful success stories on, using the Emerald as an example. We used to have somebody who used to help all the way from Newcastle come down to London almost on a quarterly basis. And her social circles increased because she didn't have many Muslim friends. The rest is history, mashallah. She met somebody at one of the events, and that's it. Another example, we used to have someone literally from the Midlands. I'm not going to mimic a Birmingham accent, he had a very staunch black country accent. He goes, I'll never marry anyone from London. And I thought, fair enough. And then fast forward 3 years, who did he marry? Someone from London. I'm never going to marry anyone who's older than me. He married someone who's 2 years older. He goes, definitely no divorcees. She was divorced. And then add, comedy to the whole scenario. He relocated down to London. So you can see, thinking a bit wider, some of the success stories can happen. But as Fauzia mentioned, observations are very, very comparable, and those are the next slides will be, so I'll go through them quite quickly. Checklist mentality, without question, it's checklist mentality. Fauzia mentioned people looking for minimum 70%. Pretty ridiculous if you think, let's be honest about that. Quick show of hands, who's got a first class degree? Anyone? Yeah, mashallah, a couple of you. Quick show of hands, who's got a 2-2 or 2-1? Virtually everybody else, basically. So if you concentrate on 2-2-2-1, you might think, where is he going with this? 2-2-2-1, deep down, 60% will probably get you 2-2-2-1, at university if you think about it. But 60% translates to only 6 out of 10, so to speak. So 6 out of 10, you've got 4 more missing tick boxes, you might think. But it just shows in life we still made it, alhamdulillah, in various fields with that kind of mindset. So why do you think we need to strive for perfection and tick all the boxes? Some of the success stories are those who didn't really have a checklist, other than the fact simple things like the faith had to be important, their outlook on life, those kind of things. And in the end, that's it. So forget the Are they into, food? Are they into global travel? Irrelevant. It's a nice to have, but it wasn't on their checklist. The point that Fauzia made, Hollywood and Bollywood, let's park that for a side and just think Chorleywood and Cricklewood. Let's really think that's reality. We're all probably from suburbia, most of us anyway. So I would say the reality is that is actually, a red herring to even think your life revolves around fantasy world and relationships. We don't do try before you buy, as we know. So at the end of the day, there isn't a dating scene per se. We do, unfortunately, for some, we might think, oh my gosh, scary, from zero to marriage, there's nothing in between. Well, that's here to protect us, as we know, Islamically. So why get duped almost by the perfection and the romance, as Fauzia mentioned earlier on as well. So we've been almost brought up male, female, separate in terms of events. So whether it's university ISOC events, whether it's culturally in the community and obviously in the mosque and what have you, that's fine, that's from a spiritual dimension. But from a social interaction perspective, that has its good and bad things. As in obviously good, it protects us in terms of relationships, there's no casual dating and what have you. But then the bad thing, I'll say with a little b, obviously not too bad, but it's a case of it has affected our ability to engage with the opposite gender. So anyone remembers Goodness Gracious Me? Yeah, if you remember the cringeworthy, character, check please, so relevant sadly, because our inability almost to, shall we say, converse basically with the opposite gender, we say so many embarrassing things only because probably of the way we've been brought up. So, a simple statement here, Dave versus Dawood, that can apply to obviously the opposite gender as well. What am I getting at here? It's almost that inability to almost distinguish between the fact, well, I'll say distinguish basically, our interaction with Muslims versus non-Muslims can differ when they shouldn't. They're human, they're fellow males or they're fellow females. But what we do find is almost awkwardness. Say somebody's colleague at work, he's Dave, no problem as a female, she'll interact, no problem. If it's Dawood, head down, run a mile, can't look him in the eye, you might give him the wrong signals, you might want to marry me, and I thought, whoa, calm down. It's actually, you're working on a project together, treat him as the same as Dave, basically, and same obviously with the opposite gender. But it's that really, really weird thing. I don't know what it is, but it probably is due to the upbringing, as Fauzia mentioned as well. So we need a bit more consistency in terms of our interactions. Ego, underline the obvious, we've got to let it go. So this applies to, again, both genders. Some of the success stories would have come from, as I said, people have the courage to say, I'm going to go up to him or go up to her and just literally ask them direct, go straight to the point. Obviously, I'll call it networking threats. One of the first questions are, so I'm going to Islam. What do you do? Where do you work? They're the rubbish questions, basically. But equally, we don't want to go straight to the Islam. Yeah, I just wondered if you wanted to get married. That's going to be a bit too forward, all I say. But you got to know, you've got to have a bit of courage. But don't think ego is what's going to stop you from doing that. So that's, you've got to let it go. Equally on status, some people play on the card that they're from a well-to-do family, they're from a social A, B class, whatever economic class, they are a doctor or they're an investment banker, hiding behind the wealth, what car they drive, what postcode they live in. That is irrelevant. End of the day, we know you can have a fast car, but it's no fast track or fast lane to heaven. It's the same for everybody, as we know, as the deeds will be judged upon. And in terms of being a professional, well, you can lose your job overnight. Or does that mean just because you are X, that means you are so-called superior? You're not really. We pray in the same line. There's no extra line forward for people with a different degree. So you can see ego hiding behind silly things like that has prevented people. Because I know people at an event they won't consider because they were only, quote unquote, a GP. So they want a fellow consultant, and I think it is ridiculous, basically. Going to whiz through the next thing. Time, literally, is a perfect time for us on that show. So time, as I said, stops for nobody. So all I would say, we're almost 5 weeks away from spring, which is scary. It's 2015 just started. We're not far from spring. Time stops for no one. So please, I say to everybody, make a little bit of time to go to events and just discover new avenues for meeting people. Fauzia's point about grower, slow burner. Wonderful success story I've had at Emerald. We've got two literal brothers. One person, bless him, romantically, love at first sight. He met his other half literally at an Eid event. First time she came, he's been going for about 1.5 years. His brother, on the other hand, used to go in, month month out. Got to recognise somebody. Salam, oh, you were here last month, blah, blah, blah. Small talk. Next month, comfortable with one another. Just carried on. Called up every month. All in the confines of public space. they literally grew on one another, and the rest is history. So both brothers got married in the same year, which is really, really nice in that sense. So you can see time. Mind the gap, that's to do with age. So no one's got any problems with George Clooney, obviously, and his age gap, or even maybe Imran Khan, but there seems to be perception that, oh, the gap is too big, but they're different because they're millionaires or they're showbiz. Let's be really honest, the deep down issue is the stage in life people are at. So you imagine you can be both the same age, but somebody wants to go travelling around the world, someone else is thinking about settling and starting a family, mishmash despite being the same age. So it's something to bear in mind. Next, sale. It sounds a bit strange, but treat it like a sale in the sense that consumerism gives you choice. Well, wrong. It's actually really bad to think it like a sale, because as a result of that, people don't give anyone a chance because they think there's a better product around the corner. There's another sale, all these Blue Cross sales that happens every month, basically, you can see. But that mindset has got to stop. Give someone a chance and take it from there. Positive outlook. Social events, we've seen the difference between positive and negative outlooks. The negative mindset will walk in and say, oh, it's the same old people, same faces. Well, they're the ones that they recognise. What about the ones they don't recognise? The eyes see the wrong things first. They just look for familiarity. There's no one in my age group. Well, the positive person will think, they might have a sibling. You never know. You just don't know. Open-minded kind of mindset. The other lack of positivity would be someone goes, oh, there's no one from my background, whatever it is, that nationality. Again, the positive person will think, I've got to open up because I can't find someone who's half Kenyan, half Pakistani, whatever specific requirements. So you can't see the difference between positive and negative. Ultimately, you want to find the one. So with that mindset, you can think room full of 90 or 100 people today. You're just looking for the one person. Don't think, oh, there wasn't enough people there. Just need the one. Stop being greedy. That's what we say. And the last couple of points, I'll move on. So Wi-Fi, we play on the terminology Wi-Fi and wife. Basically, you're looking for connection ultimately with someone. So you've got to say to yourself, think laterally, look for the signals in terms of someone's positive, someone's outgoing, that's relevant to you, compatible for you, well, go for it. Don't literally hold back thinking, oh no, there'll be another event coming down. Nowadays, people are making the connection in terms of communication, but they're not following it through. So as I said, be proactive. Technology exists today. We cannot, blame technology when it comes to communication. Once upon a time it was, I'll take your number. Well, obviously those days are over. Emails, WhatsApp, Facebook, so many avenues. But we seem to be connected, yet disconnected. That's one observation. So I would say that people who've succeeded, the ones that kept the communication going, and not just a case of swipe, 10 seconds, not interested, move on to the next one. So that's the pitfalls of somebody online. Commitment, folks. They've got cold feet, get them some socks. That's what I say on the commitment, folks. Normal distribution, very geeky one towards the end, basically. End of the day, the ummah is diverse. Let's really be honest. Yes, there are extremes at two ends. One extreme could be a cultural extreme, or in terms of inverted commas, religious extreme, but they might be very traditional in their mindset. The other extreme will be the liberal. So bar, club culture, it's not an issue for them. But for the majority of us, we are in the middle, moderate Muslims. Plenty of us out there. And that leads on to the point. For those at the back, it looks like 50 Shades of Brown. Quite hot this weekend. For those at the front, you can see it's chocolate. But all I can say, the novelty take on this one is we might have our preferences for lighter shade of chocolate because it tastes better or versus darker shade. But let's not extend that ridiculously to racism in terms of picking people based on shades of colour. One of the crimes is, without naming the website, the one that has wheatish. What the heck is wheatish as a shade of brown? So you can see basically it's producing this drop-down culture. Oh, I can pick my shade. Ridiculous. We live in a society when so-called dark-skinned people, they want an interest in those who are fair-skinned. And the fair-skinned people, they want to get a suntan and be darker. Ridiculous. That's society for you. So we need to pick out of that. But that stems from flag ahead of faith. So flag being nationality, culture. You put that ahead of faith. And when you do, a bit of a dangerous game. So ultimately then to conclude, vanity, sanity, reality. You can see which two I've picked. People who've been successful on the social scene, they've ignored the fact vanity. It's all the superficial, the nice to haves. That's all they are, nice to haves, bonus. Yes, deep down you want to be attracted to someone and something, but that shouldn't be the ultimate driver. The driver should be sanity, which is personality. So that's your mind's meeting and the connection. And reality, the mundane reality of everyday life is one thing. The ultimate reality is faith. is the driver that inshallah will keep you all together, which inshallah should purify the hearts and live happily ever after in the hereafter. Thank you very much.
I take refuge in Allah from Satan the outcast. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise and thanks belong to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. And blessings and peace on the Messenger of Allah. That line that Brother Rooful mentioned, commitment folks, cold feet, get them some socks. I must add that to my repertoire of therapeutic interventions in psychotherapy. It's brilliant. Now, I guess I'm coming from I'm going to approach this in a slightly different way from Fauzia and Rooful. I mean, I think they've done a brilliant job in terms of raising some of the practical issues, the realities of our situation. I'm going to look, inshallah, more in terms of sort of essences and in terms of principles, really, coming, inshallah, of course, from an Islamic perspective. Now, I was trying to work out how to structure this, because this is a huge area, of course, and it didn't come to me until about Asr time today. In fact, I was just after Asr at Masjid, and it just came to me that maybe I can order this in the way that I would think in terms of my psychotherapeutic work. You see, now I come from a psychoanalytic background, which is very much in terms of, there's a lot of emphasis on looking into childhood, looking at the childhood origins of our current problems. So that's how I'm going to approach it in a sort of chronological order, because I do believe that some of these problems that have been described did start in childhood. And you'll see what I mean, inshallah, in a few minutes. Also, I'm restricting this to sort of premarital scene. I mean, I just out of interest, how many people here are married? Okay, so it is very much the minority. So this, inshallah, this will be appropriate, because of course, I mean, in terms of problems and difficulties, I mean, marriage itself presents all sorts of difficulties, and they do need to be tackled. But I think today, one way of keeping this to 15 minutes, inshallah, for me is to just focus on the premarital difficulties and maybe the early marriage stages. Okay, now I said I believe these problems start in childhood, and I think we can go back to even primary school. Really, I'm going to say this in stages. Mashallah, I have 3 children, and 2 of them are in secondary school now, and one doing sort of A-levels, one doing GCSEs, and the youngest one, she's homeschooled, she's 10. Now, one of the things I've seen, and it's very disturbing, I find it very disturbing, is the emphasis that exists in education here, and probably here is better than a lot of places in the world, but the emphasis that exists on tests and marks and grades and assessments and exams. And I find it actually shocking. My wife and I, we went to a parents' evening the other night, and again, the same experience. All they really spoke about was marks and tests and attainment and grades and qualifications and so on. And I think this is it's a big problem. What has happened to things like the love of learning or getting an education? It's become so qualification orientated. And in fact, I did say to one of the teachers on a previous occasion that, look, to be honest, alhamdulillah, we feel happy with our children's sort of attainments and so on. Can we hear a little bit more about them? And he was a bit surprised initially, and he said, that I do agree with you, but when I talk about children, or I talk about their experiences, or I talk about how they're in the classroom, parents want to hear about the marks and the tests and the grades and so on. So it's not just the teachers who are at fault, you see. But we're living in this culture, and this is something we do need to be aware of, I believe. Now, how, you might say, how is this relevant to marriage? Yes. Well, think about it. We're living in a community where from an early age, and for, say, how many years of schooling, say 6 years of primary schooling and 7 years, so 13 years, and maybe more, of schooling, there is this emphasis on, as I say, marks and grades and exams and qualification. So in some ways, the certificates count more than the essences and the substance. Now, what sort of mentality does that create? Yes, in some ways, it's a show mentality. If you think about it, it's, you know, and children, and I said, another thing that disturbs me, so I've said to the older two, look, I don't really want to hear that much about how well you did in that test or that, what grade you got. Alhamdulillah, you know, I don't sort of put it down, but really I'd be much more interested in what you learned today at school. But they still do it. They still come home and say, oh, guess what, you know, we've got this, and because it's so much part of the culture. So what does this create? As I say, a lack of interest in the essence, and much more to do with show and exterior, I guess, qualifications and so on. And it goes on. You see, I asked at a gathering once, I was asking some children, well, why do you go to school? And they say, well, you know, we have to, yes, of course, but what are you doing there? And they say, well, we're learning, and in order to get good GCSEs, and then we can get good A levels, and then we can maybe go to university, and then we can get hopefully a good degree, and then, well, that might lead to a really good job, a good career, and then, well, you earn a decent amount of money, you can buy your house, your nice house, and your nice car, and then, well, then you keep working, and then, I was talking to children here, and then, well, then sort of you retire, maybe, and then you die. Now that's reality, actually. You know, but so many of us are caught in this process, yes? And it's of course, it's amazingly described in the Quran, in Surah At-Takathur, Surah number 102, which goes, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhaakumut Takathur hatta zurtumul maqabir. That one rendition is, you are obsessed by greed for more and more until you visit your graves. Or a more literal translation or rendition is that At-Takathur distracts you, it diverts you. And what's At-Takathur? It's abundance, or piling up. Yes? And rivalry for it as well. It's not just, it doesn't just mean abundance, it includes rivalry. And not just that, it includes showing off in such areas. Now, I think this has got into the arena of marriage. You see, one of the reasons I'm mentioning this, because I think, you know, with some people themselves, and sometimes with say, parents, there is this attitude of, like, say, you might use the term, a trophy wife, or a trophy husband, or a trophy daughter-in-law, or a trophy son-in-law. It's like an acquisition. You're acquiring this highly qualified, wealthy, home-owning young man as your son-in-law, for instance. You see? And I think this has led to some of the problems that have already been described, and some of the problems that come into marriage. And of course, you see, for us, I mean, this is all very dunya-based, and this is the problem. It is actually very dunya-based. It's al-hakumut takathur, this obsession. You're obsessed by greed for more and more. It's all to do with dunya. And that's a problem. So, as I say, I think it started early, and maybe this explains in some ways this predilection we have in our community now, it seems, for these grand weddings. If you think how much money and time and effort and energy is spent in having a massive wedding. Now you may say it's not a problem in itself, but actually what is it a symptom of? Why? We may ask why. Why do people behave so? I mean, it's in the culture, you say, but why is it in the culture? And I think this sort of just getting qualifications, oh sorry,
Oh, no.
How long have I got?
That's going to start it.
5
minutes, yeah.
Oh, I got more.
Don't worry.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. You see, this thing that I think started primary school, goes through secondary school, goes through university. I think, as I say, it extends to the area of marriage. I mean, it really does not make sense, in my view, to spend so much time and money and energy and effort on one day, and then virtually no time and energy and effort and money on, for instance, helping the newly married couple to have, inshallah, a successful marriage. How much time is spent in such areas? How much teaching do young couples get, for instance, in how to make a marriage work? Because as our previous speakers have said, it's not an easy thing. You see, so this is it's a problem, and it's a deep problem. And also, if we bring in the Islamic angle, and I've been talking about sort of school, let's say state schools, the secondary school and so on, but what about the Islamic teachings around primary school age and say secondary school age? Well, a lot of the teachings are restricted to things like madrasas, yes. A lot of the teachings are just in terms of rules and rituals. You know, you learn how to do this, how to do that, what's the correct way. How much are we taught at that sort of age about love, for instance, the Nejami love, this extraordinary thing, and this incredibly complex thing, yes, and it's different forms. How much are we taught about compassion, which again, essential in a marriage? Yes, how much are we taught about patient perseverance, or gratitude, or forgiveness? Oh, thank you. Very little, you see. We're just taught this is how you do it, you know. And even it's very common when people ask questions to say imams or scholars or whatever. The questions that often are asked are fiqh type questions. You know, how do you do this? What's the right way of doing it? What are the rights and responsibilities, say for instance, a husband or a wife? Now these are important things, but actually, how much teaching do we get in terms of, as I say, the nature of compassion, or the nature of love? Yes? It's largely missing from our community. And then we wonder why there are these problems. Okay. Now, another area, and this may sort of may shock some people here, I don't know, which I believe is a problem, is our response to and our attitudes towards puberty. You see, we're living in a society actually where adulthood begins at an arbitrary age, that's of 18 or whatever, yes? But actually the physical reality, the biological reality is adulthood is at puberty. Now, so what happens when a young man, and I'll call him a man, or a young woman who's gone post-puberty, yes? The hormones are there, yes? Well, those of us who've gone through puberty, we know the hormones are there. We're not, but they're not seen as adults, you see. They're still like teenagers or school children. Now, what are these children supposed to be doing? You know, they're not. There's no question of marriage at that age, of course, in the society we live in. Yeah, so what happens? Well, all sorts of things do happen. This is the thing. By denying the reality of adulthood at that sort of age, all sorts of things happen. And with modern technology now, I mean, all sorts of very inappropriate things are happening, and some very, very disturbing and worrying things are happening. Because I mean, those young men and women do have urges and instincts and desires. And I'm not just talking of sexual ones. I mean, loving instincts, nature, the desire for relationship. You know, so there's this big gap between, say, puberty and a marriageable age, which seems to be going higher and higher, as was described earlier. What are people supposed to do? Now, isn't it interesting? Here's the question: why is it acceptable, for instance? I mean, I'm not talking about the Muslim community. Let's say in the non-Muslim world, why is it acceptable for, say, a 15-year-old to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and yet the possibility of marriage at that age is just not thought of? What's the difference between being married at 15, I mean, apart from legal reasons, yes, and having a boyfriend or girlfriend at 15?
Would you want to answer?
Maybe, well, go on then, go on, yeah.
Well, I would have thought...
Can you take this off my time, though?
I would have thought that the way the world is structured at the moment, most 15 and 16-year-olds, with the current situation in their life and the way that the world is now, they won't be able to buy a house, they won't be able to support children and send those children to school. So there's a financial implication, which means that those 15, 16-year-olds, it will be tough. It's not prohibited, but it will be tough.
So, the sister gave the answer that I was going to give in terms of, I think, what people think. It's a financial one. But hang on a minute. Why is it all right for a 15-year-old to have a boyfriend or girlfriend?
I would say it was.
No, I mean, but that was the question. Do you see, there's this assumption that if you're married, it's going to involve financial responsibilities, which aren't there if you're having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. It's going to require a certain level of commitment, which doesn't have to be there if you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Do people see what I'm saying? I mean, I think logically or rationally, there's no reason, apart from these assumptions that we make. I mean, in fact, if someone can have a boyfriend or a girlfriend and say a relationship with them, a physical relationship, I mean, do they have to be in a marriage living together, for instance? Do you see, why does calling it a marriage make it a completely different thing? And one of the things is this financial. People have this idea that in order to be married, you do have to have like a house or a car, or be earning X amount or whatever. Now, of course, we know the Prophet made it clear there are people who don't have the means to get married. But actually, if someone can, as I say, have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, why can't that be transformed into marriage at that age? Something to think about. Okay, let me continue though, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. And then, of course, you have the university scene, yes, where actually again culturally, some of the restrictions that exist, say in the Muslim community, are lifted to some extent. There aren't the parental or the geographical, not geographical, sort of like the home constraints. People are freer, and actually I mean, this is sort of anecdotally, I mean, from what I've heard over the years, I mean, all sorts of things do go on at university, even amongst practicing Muslims. I mean, because we're dealing with very strong forces, you see. Now, this actually, again, this can lead to problems then in marriage, because one of the things I've, again, come across both in my work and also sort of more generally, is that even though a lot of people have had relationships at university and then marry someone who's had relationships at university, dealing with that once you're married, I mean, there's the possibility of a lot of jealousy, a lot of insecurity, sometimes leading to almost breakdown. People can't deal emotionally sometimes, you see. So that's another area, but I'm going to jump because of time. See, this idea. There's an idea, I think, again, even amongst us in the Muslim community, of like finding the right partner, and right in inverted commas, you see. Now, there's some of those considerations I've given so far. do lead, I think, in the current situation to people delaying finding the right partner, because right becomes in people's minds like a function. He was an atheist, okay, and he was going out with someone for a number of years. And I said to him once, I said, why don't you marry her? You know, why don't you just marry her? You've been going out for so many years. And he said this, and it's very interesting. He said, well, you know, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in an afterlife. So my belief is this is all there is to it. You get the one chance, one life, one chance. So I've got to be absolutely sure that I'm making the right decision. And there's logic to that. If you don't believe in an afterlife and you believe you've got the one chance, then of course you need to be quite careful. Yes, if you intend to spend the rest of your life with someone. Yes. But the thing is, I think some of us in the Muslim community are behaving in that way when it comes to marriage, when it comes to finding a partner. You know, as if we behave as if there isn't an akhirah sometimes. You know, so this is why, I think this is almost like an explanation for why the person has to be 100% or even 70%, as was mentioned earlier. You know, because this is it. I mean, none of us here, Muslim, we don't believe this is it. We do believe in akhirah, but we forget, you see. So it's like people are terrified of making the wrong decision. What if this person isn't 100%? You know, I've got to find just the right person. Yes. And again, that's a problem in terms of delaying marriage. And this, one of the things I've seen again over the years is that actually, despite what we might consider to be halal and haram in terms of, you know, sort of premarital contact, a lot of people do have the attitude that, well, you've got to get to know the person. You know, before you can commit yourself, yeah, you've got to get to know somehow. Now, obviously not in the ways that might exist outside the Muslim community, but there is this idea of getting to know, okay, in whatever form. Now the internet facilitates that greatly. But you know, there's a problem here, because if you think about it, there are people, and maybe many of us know people like this, who spend years, again, maybe from the outside the Muslim community, but who spend years getting to know someone, like my friend did. And in fact, that relationship ended, in fact. I think she couldn't wait. I mean, you know, she got fed up. But anyway, so they spend years getting to know someone. And then they may spend years getting to know them intimately and physically. They may even spend time getting to know the person by living together. Yeah. Sometimes they'll even go as far as having children in order to get to know, is this the right person? And then finally, you know, they'll tie the knot. Yeah, they're convinced this is the right person for me, you know, and then they'll divorce in a few years. Now the point I'm making is that from those sorts of situations, it seems that getting to know someone is not the solution to a marriage lasting. Yes? There may be other factors. And maybe in the discussion time we might be able to discuss some of those factors. So we have to do it, I guess, the Islamic way. You know, and again, culture comes into this. You know, Fauzia's example of the bride who was seen on the day of the wedding. I mean, that it's going against the Sunnah in some ways, because the Prophet actually recommended that you see your prospective partner so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might put love in your hearts for them. So this, I mean, in my parents' generation or grandparents' generation, people did actually marry without seeing their prospective partner until the marriage day. That's not actually the Islamic way as far as we understand it. But then again, we don't have to go to the other extreme of sort of getting to know. Now, what do we do? Well, one of the things is we trust in Allah. Yes, and in fact, throughout all this, I should have said this right at the beginning, I believe, I think we all believe that solutions are there in Islam, but what we need to do is to bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into these relationships. Yes? Bring Allah into the relationship. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, take for instance the verse in Surah Al-Rum. This is أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآية لقوم يتفكرون. That, and from his signs is that he has created from amongst yourselves spouses so that you may dwell in tranquility with them. And he has put between you love and rahmah, love and mercy, love and compassion. Indeed, verily in that are signs for people who reflect. Now really, if we think about love and the nature of love and the nature of falling in love, it is, it is a sign. I mean, it's miraculous. And the word that's used in the Arabic is ayah, yes, sign, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and from amongst his signs. But sign, ayah can also mean miracle or wonder. So amongst his wonders, amongst his miracles is this. And then what was described, yes? And if you think about it, the falling in love process is miraculous. I mean, some people would say it's psychotic, yes? It's an extreme state. Now, I remember years ago when an aunt of mine was getting married, and I've been in the UK sort of since I was 2 years old, so you know, I've been exposed to this idea you get to know someone before you get married and so on. I've gone way over.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Just maybe one over there.
Okay, I'll just finish up,
Yeah.
inshallah. Thank you.
That's-
And an aunt of mine got married, and hardly she didn't know the husband. This is back in Bangladesh, and I at the time, and I think I was a teenager, so I was thinking, how can this be? How can this work? She doesn't know him. She knew nothing about him. Now, of course, the thing is, this falling in love process is an extraordinary process, and it's such a blessing from Allah to give almost like a kick-start to a relationship. And when someone is in love, really, the objective qualities of the other person become secondary. Yes? I mean, it's not objective, is it? Because, objectively, you might be able to say, well, actually, it is possible that there is someone else more beautiful than the person I'm in love with, or better looking in the world. But actually, it feels like they are. So it's not based on objective traits. You see all this sort of looking for the right sort of person. When you're in love, in some ways it really doesn't matter. Now, the Islamic arranged marriage process is such a beautiful one because what you do is you do take some objective factors into consideration before the setting off of this process of falling in love. And then you have this wonderful sort of kick-start if things go well, inshallah. And it only requires some sort of little triggers in some ways, a little bit of mutual liking, a little bit of mutual willingness and so on. Yes, attraction. In the way that people do, for instance, in nightclubs. I mean, again, yeah? Yes? And then you spend the rest of your lives, inshallah, dealing with this thing that we say is half the deen, or it's been said is half of our religion. Why is it half of our religion? I heard something. Yeah, sorry, I will end on this because I'm going. There's a Shaykh Muhammad Akram Nadwi. He's a very well-known scholar from India, and he said this thing in a marriage seminar. He said, why is it half the deen? We all know this. We all know it's half the deen, but why? And one of the things he said, it's half the deen because it's so hard, you see, to sustain a long-term marriage. It's so hard. And within that hardship, though, within all that struggling, within all sorts of qualities, and I'm sort of slightly paraphrasing what he said, so I hope I'm not being inaccurate, but you develop all these qualities. Within all that effort, you develop qualities, yes, which really are qualities which are very much part of our deen. Things like love and compassion, patience, tolerance, forgiveness, yes, gratitude, appreciation. These are necessary qualities to sustain a marriage, you see. So that's one of the reasons he said it's half been. I'm going to respect the time. I was going to talk about unrealistic expectations, but I think it's not fair if I have too much time. So thank you.
Inshallah, yeah. We've got maybe about 20 minutes for questions, maybe 25 minutes. I guess if you want to particularly direct it to one of the speakers, you can do it. If it's an open-ended question, I'll try to manage it. Keep it to maybe one question initially, and then obviously depending on the demand, we can potentially allow for a second one as well. If you do want to make a comment, keep it brief, because I may just have to cut you off otherwise. So if we start at the front with the lady here, inshallah.
It's very nice hearing all the views from all the speakers. Just one point that hasn't really been mentioned, which is sort of relevant. More and more now we're getting these people meeting their prospective husband and wife at events, at work, outside the arranged marriage framework, which is fine. But what tends to happen there, and I've seen it happen with a lot of people I know, is that attachments form and emotions are involved. And then when it comes to when they introduce their parents, on both sides, the parents don't agree. And by that point you're emotionally attached, I assume, and it's difficult to break away, especially since the person is not the one rejecting, it's his parents or your parents. What should a person at that point do? I mean, is it a case of like what Fauzia said before, look to the West? Well, in the West, they just marry the person anyway. And I wouldn't agree with. I wouldn't say we shouldn't look to the West. I don't agree with you 100% there, because there's some things in the West that they don't do right, and Islamic cultures and the Islamic religion we prefer. So what should a person in that situation do? Because prolonging that relationship when the parents are not involved, outside marriage, can also is unhealthy. It leads to emotional attachment.
Do you want to direct that to anyone in particular?
Fauzia or anyone really.
Okay, just to quickly repeat for those who didn't hear. So essentially, to very shortly summarise, I think if people sort of do follow the steps that we'll advise, essentially about keeping an open mind and so forth, but then reach a point where they're ready to move forward to the next step, and then parents essentially cause barriers there. What's the advice to deal with the next step? Do you want to just answer very quickly and close you can add something? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've come across this sort of problem regularly, and in some ways, I think that the key is to not let the attachment develop to an extent where then there's going to be serious conflicts when it comes to sort of parents or family or whatever. That's the thing. I don't think we should be allowing attachments to develop. It develops sometimes to a level where someone will say, like I know someone who, for instance, his daughter wants to marry someone who wasn't Muslim, and the parents didn't agree. Obviously, they weren't agreeable to this, and they said to her in the end, well, you have to choose either him or us, and she chose him. And I mean, I don't. This was years ago, and I don't know if they've reconciled. I mean, it sort of broke up the family. You see, now really. As I say, I mean, some of these forces are so strong. We need to take the relevant steps before all this is set in motion, you see. So yes, I mean, as the Prophet said, you see the person that you want to marry, but this idea of attachments forming, it's very dangerous. I mean, yeah. So
from an Islamic point of view, before we get the response from an Islamic point of view, is it acceptable to marry somebody when your parents are not happy, or when his parents are not happy, or vice versa?
Well, yes. I mean, okay, that's the bit. There are situations, for instance, where the principle, say, of the lesser of evils does apply. I mean, even in situations where there's, say, there's haram activity going on, obviously it's better for two people to be continuing with a nikah, for instance, in a situation, than to be maintaining their relationship without nikah. You see, so this common thing that people come up to imams and say, well, can you marry us or whatever, and then you'll discover that actually the father's not, like the wali, the girl's father, is not agreeable. Now, for instance, I mean, there is an opinion, I mean, like in the Hanafi school, a woman actually doesn't need the consent of her wali, her guardian, to marry. So in that sort of situation, it's clear that it's better that they, I mean, if it's clear that the attachment has developed to an extent that actually breaking it up would just be a disaster and no one's inclined to, then it's better that they do get married, yes? It could have serious repercussions on the family. So in that sort of situation, the practical thing is to talk to the father and say, look, you know, well, why not? I mean, your daughter's in love or whatever, okay, you may not like that this man has come from a different village to yours or whatever. I mean, sometimes the parents, of course, have, in some ways, un-Islamic reasons for disagreeing to the nikah, you see. In those sort of situations, there are exceptions, actually. There are, you know, as I said, in the Hanafi school, it's not even a requirement for to have a consent of your wali. So, but it's got to be handled, I mean, because you don't want to break up families and you don't want to break up marriages.
Yeah, just I think perhaps I wasn't entirely clear. I'm not suggesting that we follow the West. That is the last thing I'm suggesting. What I was trying to get at is the aspect when you see that people are dismissing each other based on superficial criteria, and they're not actually looking at the person as a whole. And I think there are sometimes, what's happened is I think we're in a bind between two different models of how we should be in terms of relationships and how our identities should be, and we're getting a little bit confused about where we are. And as I understand it, we are allowed to take the best from the West as well as our own faith and everything that all the benefits and blessings that it brings us. So what I was trying to get at is the fact that with some Western relationships, what you see is people are prepared to give someone a chance. They take on someone else's baggage. You look at your high street, there are people of all different shapes and sizes and looks and appearances, and they seem to be, you see lots of couples in different, who look like, they're quite happy and content. And you think, well, if they were Muslim at the moment now, second, third generation, if they turned up to a marriage event, would they get married? Would our parents, who are, grandparents, who come in all shapes and sizes, all looks, some are good looking, some are not good looking, would they get married now if they were trying? And that's what I'm trying to get at, is to sort of encourage us to actually take on board some of the factors that other people take on board when they're looking at a relationship. They get to know it, they get to know a person a little bit. And again, I take on board everything that Brother Shahnawaz has said. I fully sort of agree with everything that he said. But there's the issue of taking on someone's baggage and accepting that someone has flaws and liking them regardless of it. And at the moment, lots of people, especially when they come to marriage events and they've got the criteria, checklist mentality in mind, don't do that, and they're denying themselves the opportunity to get to know people on a sort of more holistic level. So that's what I was meaning, to just take a leaf out of our friends' ways of looking at other people, and the fact that they're prepared to give someone a chance, even if they might have a hearing aid, or they might not be the best looking person in the world, or they might be a little bit older than they would ordinarily be thinking about. They are prepared to give people a bit more of a chance than we seem to be doing, or than I see younger people seem to be doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question.
Yes, there was a recent report in the paper, according to the Shia school of thought, that they have a muta, that's called the temporary nikah. So the youngsters, they are adopting that way of living. It is more closer to the Western way of co-inhabitant. I am sure you have knowledge of that. So what do you think of that?
Okay, so just sorry, very quick for those who maybe didn't hear, talking about the idea of temporary marriage, and I think the person at the front said that there's an article that suggested that maybe some people are actually adopting that tradition to allow them to maybe adopt a lifestyle which is close to the Western lifestyle. I got the impression you're directing to.
I think he is the right man to ask.
I might be Shia. I mean, from a Sunni
But the
perspective.
Shia say Muta is still valid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all I can
And
say
the
is
Sunni says it was
Yeah.
stopped.
from a Sunni perspective, it's not permissible, and I have to say.
But we
personally,
can't ignore the Shia brothers.
I'm not ignoring them. I mean, if that's what they believe. Yeah. But from a Sunni perspective, it's not permissible. And as I would say, from a personal perspective, it doesn't make sense. Actually, I mean, taking the how can that be? I mean, a sort of allowance to have dirty weekends or whatever.
But we are living in this society and we are living in the mixture of the four cultures. We are born Muslim, we are from Indian subcontinent, we are converted Hindu from Hindu to Muslim. Now we are dominantly influenced by the European culture.
So, but what's your point? As in, he said, according to Sunni tradition, it's, from his understanding until now. So you're saying that it should be something we should consider?
And any nation came from abroad in England or America. Eventually, after 3 to 4 generations, most of them, they adopted the same way of living.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Well, you're actually here first. Brother here, and Blue, and then the sister in the picture.
It's a question for, actually, a couple questions, but I'll go with Fauzia first. You mentioned a clique. In your experience, it's something that I've heard from my friends quite a lot as well, and there was no clique, and so I've said it myself. In your experience, of people you've spoken to, how did other people see a clique happening or not happening?
So just, yeah, the question was basically, how was a clique essentially perceived, I guess, or personality, what you're referring to, yeah, not into.
It's a very weird turn of phrase, isn't it? The click. Yeah, I think people take it to mean this sort of instant connection, that suddenly you speak to someone and you know, yes, straight away this is the right person for me because they're finishing my sentences, we share all the same interests, we watch the same things, we share the same outlook on life. It's just everything sort of aligns itself in one instant, and that's what they mean by the click. That's how it gets relayed to me. So I don't know if that is sort of what you mean when you talk about the click in your. So
I guess it's weird because when I talk to people, I get on with most people and I click with them to some extent, but then I don't click. That's I think I don't know what I actually mean by click. So I'm confused.
I assume that when it happens, you'll know it.
Yes.
The girl with the blue scarf, do you have a question? Yes.
Okay, just to kind of carry on with what that man in the front row was saying,
Okay.
I do think there is a problem that once upon a time, it's nerve-wracking when you've got so many reasons, but once upon a time, I think Muslims, we used to look at like celebrity marriages, oh my God, Kim Kardashian's married for 55 days, oh my God, look at us, how long our marriages last. And we used to have a kind of holier than thou attitude, but all of a sudden, actually, our Muslim marriages aren't lasting much longer than that, or sometimes they're even less than that. So I do think there is a kind of trend towards shorter marriages, kind of like treat a spouse now like an iPhone, new iPhone. So, you're all excited, you've got the new iPhone, you unwrap the box, great, do play with it for a little while. You get bored, you're looking for an upgrade, you're looking for the next best thing. It is happening and we have to face that. Another thing, I'm kind of asking you whether you've encountered this in your research and stuff like that. Another thing is we have this problem in our communities of hiding things, yeah? So when two people are coming together, like, in the introductory stage, stuff like addiction, stuff like baggage, even the stuff like previous relationships, kids, they're not mentioned, and often mums want like their sons to have wives to kind of tame them because they're a bit wild or because they're a bit like that. And it's an issue because marriage is not a solution to anything. And like you said, it's, you've got to work hard and blah, blah, blah. And as well as having unrealistic expectations about the husband or wife, we also have unrealistic expectations about what marriage can do for us and about marriage. So I just wanted to know if you, you in your psychotherapy sessions and you in your research, and you as well if you want to talk about Emerald networking, whether you've come across the same thing or whether you see.
Okay, so just so two questions. One is essentially Are Muslims viewing marriages like iPhones in terms of basically seeing sort of temporary? I mean, the Saudi guy was in less than an iPhone, he was like 3 minutes. I think. And the other thing is, if you're finding that people are not being all too honest and hiding certain things, albeit quite serious things about their personality, for the sake of getting married. So, Director Dr. Fauzia first, I think. Yeah, or
Okay. That's an interesting one about the iPhone concept, because I did mention about the whole search process being like consumers, basically. So no one's ever satisfied. They want the next thing. So if someone's in front of them, you know, they tick a lot of the boxes. They're waiting for the next event, or they're doing the ultimate rude thing at an event, where they're looking at you, they're not engaged because they're actually trying to look around you to the next person, which is so rude. I've seen it happen before. So you're right, they're not taking it seriously is one thing, but the serious nature of it, because as a mindset, they're never satisfied, or like your brother was saying, it's almost like showing off, want a trophy wife, trophy husband. The level of expectation is, I said, unrealistic, but they're trying to, instead of keeping up with the Jones and whatever, keeping up with the Khans or these things, basically, trying to almost outdo one another, desperate for that thing that doesn't really exist. That's the first point. In terms of hiding addictions and stuff, actually on the social scene, sadly, I do know of a couple of instances, unfortunately, where marriages didn't work out, and it was a case of, sadly, going back to almost my point about that. I said, what did they look for in the outset? They looked for the superficial things. They didn't really think about reality. And reality, I kind of emphasised, was faith. So the fact is, somebody did drink, was so-called the phrase, but actually he still did drink, if you know what I mean. So it wasn't past tense, he still does drink. And that was a shock to her, obviously. Another one was similar kind of situation, as I said, Fauzia's point about baggage. It's that openness, that transparency. It's just being upfront as much as one can in a short time frame. Obviously, you can get to know one another, as we know, for literally years, but the reality is in weeks, for 4 or 5 weeks, they didn't ask the relevant questions. And that addiction of his that he had, sadly, he just like kept under wraps, and then obviously within 12 weeks, it just didn't work out, which is a shame.
Yeah, there's a number of things to sort of add to that. The short Muslim marriages thing, this is one of the things that I'm interested in looking at in terms of research. There have been, one of my colleagues did a little summation, a little survey of single parent households, just to sort of look at the kind of issue around that from that perspective. And she found that Muslims or people who come from Muslim backgrounds via ethnicity are showing pretty much close to the same level of single parent household figures as the white British population. And we know anecdotally by talking to Muslim women's organisations up and down the country that one of the biggest issues that they get calls about are the numbers of failing marriages, especially within the first few weeks, within the year, the first couple of years of marriage. So we know that there is not just a problem of rising divorce rates, but it's rising divorce rates within very early stages of the marriage. So that's something that really needs to be explored and looked at, and as Brother Shahnawaz was saying as well, we really do need to put some emphasis on pre-marital counselling and post-marital counselling, which mosques for some reason don't seem to be that interested in providing. The other issue around hiding aspects of personality in marriage, and marriage being seen as a solution or as a cover for someone's errant behaviour beforehand. Again, when you talk to enough people, you hear so many stories. You know, and there are some that are very close to home, of families that are very outwardly religious, you know, but they have a relative within their family who, or relatives who are, you know, essentially atheist in their practice, and yet they will conceal that for the purposes of marriage. And so, you know, you get poor unsuspecting girls who marry into a family thinking it's a good family for all the right reasons and are keeping their parents happy, and find out that the guy drinks, eats pork, has had relationships beforehand, parents know about it, parents are also, you know, drinkers and eat pork, etc. There's no Islamic practice at all. You know, so there's a lot, you know, that's one example that's quite close to home. There are lots of other examples I hear about where deception is quite, you know, is quite common. I've heard of other stories where women have got married and found out afterwards that their husband has a girlfriend and a baby with the girlfriend, and the parents knew about it, but they want to kind of have a nice kind of Asian Muslim wife for appearance's sake, and so there's that sort of aspect, and there's a lot of one of the kind of sad things about it is the attitudes of some parents or parents-in-laws towards, or views towards daughters, and this sort of notion that they will put up and shut up, this sort of put up and shut up culture that sort of maybe our parents' generation endured and are still kind of expecting second, third generation British Muslims to also sort of endure. And I think these are real problems. Again, it's an issue about transparency and being open about baggage and thinking, you want to have a happy marriage. No one wants to end up going into marriage with bad intentions and having a miserable life. You are going to have a miserable marriage if you conceal things from your prospective partner, because you're going to destroy that trust that should be there in a marriage. And without trust, you don't have a marriage. So this is something that we need to work on as individuals, as well as helping each other to sort of work past those aspects.
Anything to add?
Just a small one. Okay. I mean, I guess what I would say is that, all this has to be seen in the context of what life is all about, you see. One way of looking at things, of course, is that we are all being put through all sorts of tests and trials. We know this is part of our reality, yes? Now, how we relate to those things is what's crucial. So even in a situation where, say, of course, if someone has been deceptive, or someone has some sort of problem which they've not conveyed the true extent of, or whatever. Yeah, again, from a sort of Sharia point of view, the other person has the right to end the marriage or whatever. But actually, some people might consider hanging on in there, you see, because, as I say, it's the relationship to the difficulties we experience, the trials and so on, and the tests, that's crucial. I know someone, for instance, I found it really difficult to understand at the time, but it was very admirable. Someone who he was going to marry, he wanted to marry a woman, and it was, I think, her second marriage, and he'd been married before as well. But she had a child who was fairly severely learning disabled. Okay. Now he didn't see it at all as a negative thing. When he discovered that she had this child. He saw it as a way for him to do some good, which is very admirable, you see. So, there doesn't necessarily have to be automatic responses to situations. We can, and I think we do need to keep in mind what life is all about.
I think on that note, it's actually quite a nice return. Sorry, I appreciate a few more questions. That we do have the venue for, I think, to about quarter past. Is that right? It's about half an hour, so if you do want to ask any questions, speakers have to stick around, certainly. Just want to say thank you very much to all the speakers for their time. 2 announcements to make. One is after we close up here, it's about 9:15, there's a booking at the Beirut Cafe for up to about 50 people, so I guess it's on a first come, first served basis. So it's a set menu for £15 a head, which a small amount will be going to City Circle. So if you want to sort of have any discussions or carry them on there, then you're more than welcome. And also, so obviously this was a ticketed event with a cost of £5, but most weeks the event's actually free to yourselves, but they do have a cost of each about £150 to £200. So we do ask for sort of a small donation. We have standing orders forms at the back. So even if it's a nominal amount, like £5 a month, it can go a long way to ensuring we can continue these events. Thanks a lot for your time, Circle Ahead.